Well, folks, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune because it's time for another week of the Rec Poker Podcast. I've got the best job in the world. That's why I'm the luckiest guy I know. I get to hang out here every week talking to my poker friends about poker strategy. I've got it made. My name is Jim Reed. I'm Bluffsterini in the home games and Rec Poker Jim on Twitter. I have to thank our sponsors, the amazing Mark Prashant over at Website Amp and everyone at Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Thank you so much for your support. Of course, it's not just our sponsors, but our premium members here at Rec Poker. If you don't know what Rec Poker is about, it's a largely volunteer-based organization. Most of what we do is free. You can come and get a free community account. All it takes is an email address and a smile. But if people who do want to kick it up a notch and get more involved in our learning and social activities, do that through the premium membership. It only costs $15 a month, and you can get your first month for only $5 if you use the code RECPOKER. One of the perks is you get to join our forums conversations like this. So I'm proud to have Eric Anderson, a prolific poster in our forums and an excellent premium member here at Rec Poker, joining us in the conversation tonight. But the core of our team, the real backbone of what we do at Rec Poker here is the Wrecking Crew. Those amazing individuals who put their time in every week, every month, hosting our strategy sessions, our study groups, joining me on the podcast, sharing their insights throughout our different themes of the month. And if you want to find out more about the Wrecking Crew and the amazing folks on it, you can go to rec.poker/crew. But you can also just listen up because you're going to meet a few of them right now, starting with our newest Wrecking Crew member, the one and only Ben Enslow.
My name is Ben Enslow, as Jim just said. One of the new members of the Wrecking Crew. You can find me at BJamin96 on Twitch. You can find the rest of my socials there. Easiest place to go. And I'm East Coast bidder in the Poker Stars home game. And I'm glad to be here.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I am Fergie56 in the home game, and I am PetVet_33 on Twitter and most other platforms.
And I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Radman50 just about everywhere.
Well, thanks everyone for joining me for this episode. This is the forums edition of the podcast. So just like we do most Monday nights, some of us are playing against each other in the nightly home games. We do 10 of those home games a week that the great John Somsky puts together. And while we're doing that and trying to steal each other's chips, we're going to take a post from the Rec.Poker forums and talk about it here on the air. This week, we're looking at a post from Taylor Moss, who's another OG member of the Wrecking Crew. This is in the Hand Histories forum, and it's called Heads Up for a Tournament Win. How do we get all the chips? So I'll just I'll just sort of lay a little scene here for our listeners at home. But I do encourage our listeners, go get a free Rec Poker account and check out the forum post yourself. If you go to the show notes, you can see a link to this post. If you click on that, you can kind of see it's not just Taylor. Chris Jones is in there responding. Eric Anderson has a response. I'm a Luigi has a response. Louis Hillman, who's a fun follow on Twitter as well, another one of the great members here at Rec Poker. And if you enjoy visual learning, I find being able to sort of see it all laid out sometimes makes it easier to follow the action than just listening on the audio podcast version. But so heads up for a tournament win. Taylor Moss is he's done very well for himself, which is not to be a surprise. He's gotten heads up, and as he says, so ICM is out the window. It's all about getting the win. So we're 29 big blinds effective. We're on the button with King 9 offsuit, and we make our standard open to 2 big blinds and get called. The flop comes King of Spades, 7 of Hearts, 4 of Hearts. They check, and we bet 1.6 big blinds into a pot of 4, so a little less than half pot. They raise us to 4 big blinds. Is there anything that you guys want to talk about at this point when it comes to Taylor's sizing choice or hand selection or anything like that? It's a King 7-4 two-tone flop. We've got King 9 offsuit. It all seems fairly standard. Kim, you look like you've got something. You're muted at the moment.
I'm wondering, do we have the chip lead here? I'm not entirely sure of that.
Yeah,
we do.
He says the effective stack is 29, but he does not say who covers who. And I agree that is important because the person Yeah, go
I
ahead, Rob.
think that it says heads up for a tournament win. How do we get all the chips in? So we're going to assume that Taylor is ahead
Okay,
Okay.
that's
because he's
good
trying to
point.
get all the chips in to win the tournament.
Good point. Okay.
Still
And I
good.
think as Kim's getting at, it does make a
Hmm.
big difference who's at risk. Yeah, Ben, sorry.
Well, I think it still matters to know exactly how much he has because it's important to know if we lose, how much we're going to have
Mm.
left behind so that we know, are we going to have 5 big blinds? Are we going to have 15? Are we going to have 20? Like what kind of a margin are we going to have if we lose in an all-in situation?
Great point. So yeah, Taylor, maybe just include that information next time you're putting a post like
Yeah,
this in.
Taylor Moss.
God, like, is he good for anything? I swear. In all seriousness, Taylor's been on a freaking heater. And if people don't know, we're just making fun of him because we're all impressed at how good at poker he is. Taylor is actually leading the Player of the Year race, not only for the No Limit Hold'em Player of the Year race at Rec Poker, but also the Mixed Game Player of the Year race. Right? Currently, he's in first place in both of those. There's only 1 month to play, so our regular listeners will know that we enjoy teasing Taylor Moss, but it comes from a place of love and respect. But yeah, Taylor, get your stuff together, man. When it comes to filling out these forum posts, good God, we don't even know who's covering who. Like, what is this, amateur hour? And yeah, great point by Ben that it really does matter because if the effective stack is 29 big blinds, but the other player has like 85 behind, then it's not nearly as, the stakes aren't as high as if one player has 29 big blinds and the other has 31 big blinds. Then that really does change the importance of the hand. Yeah, but yeah, okay, so good comment there. So we bet 1.6 big blinds. It's a bit of a down bet, and we get raised to 4 from we get check raised to 4. So Taylor says, I think we could make a case for raising ourselves, but this feels like a standard spot to just call, and that's what they do. So let's get to the turn unless someone wants to weigh in. I don't think we can fold, and I don't think our hand is so strong that it's a mandatory raise. So I think calling does kind of feel natural here. We'd be calling with a lot of our weaker hands as well, so we can kind of try and induce some further aggression from this player with a relatively strong bluff catcher ourselves, which I like. The turn is the 9 of spades. So pretty good card for us. The board is now King of Spades, 7 of Hearts, 4 of Hearts, 9 of Spades. So we've got top 2 pair on a 2-tone board. There's a couple gut shot straights out there, but and then there's the 2 flush draws. I think we can probably discount the spade flush draw given the check raise on the flop, but you never know. They bet into us 6 big blinds. And at this point, the pot would be 12, so it's half pot, which is an interesting sizing choice given that they check raised the flop. Check raising is kind of a polarizing action, and so I tend to expect a different bet size here on the turn when they bet the turn into us here. So as Taylor says, I think this is the interesting spot. Now we beat all their 2 pairs and are in a great spot versus anything but a set. So how do we proceed to get the most value here? Raise all in, try to get called by their draws, but fold out their bluffs. Call, hope that they continue their aggression line on the river, and also hope that they don't hit whatever draw they might be on. And then if we call, what do we do if they jam on rivers when a heart or spade comes? And what do we do if they just check to us? And then there's a bonus discussion that we'll get into a little later. But given that we are heads up, what is everyone thinking about this particular spot? We get bet into on the turn. We've got top 2 pair. We're feeling very good about our hand. Should we be raising or calling? Let's start with that. I assume no one's folding. Okay,
No
good,
one's
because
folding.
you'd never be welcome back on the show again.
I have
That would be bad for my first show.
a quick question on the pre-flop.
Yeah.
Do you guys do pre-flop ranges similar to like small blind versus big blind? Are you a lot looser than that when your head's up?
It changes for me because you're going to be in position post flop when your head's up. So my small blind continuing range is going to look very different heads up than it will 3 to 9 handed. being able to be in position post flop means that I can limp with a lot more hands. And so I'm going to be extreme. I'm playing almost every hand.
So like a
Wha-
big blind range or even looser than that.
No, 90%.
Even looser. Yeah.
90 to 95% of hands you should be
Yeah.
playing either as a call or a raise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's,
because
yeah,
the
I
thing,
just
and the
wanted
other
to clarify that.
yeah, the
Yeah,
other
good
thing is
question.
when there's more dead money in the pot when you're 9-handed. When you get folded around to and you're in the small blind, you can't. There's more dead money that you have to account for
Mm.
there. I think.
Oh, the antes and stuff.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
ante.
there's an ante in there.
So there's more of an
Um,
incentive for you to raise there too, because there's more dead money for you to win.
Yeah, that's
So,
a
I don't
great
know.
point. And you're definitely going to be
But
because
then when
you're
your head's
limping
up,
so
I guess you
often.
just gotta keep the guys short. You just gotta keep the other guys, you just gotta open, just fire. As you're just boxing and, bobbing and weaving a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, some of it's kind of villain dependent. I think like you're saying there, Ben, like players that are going to overfold, I'll probably raise the small blind more. I'll probably open raise more than against other players. Players that are going to raise more or call more, I think limping the small blind is a better line in these heads up spots. But it makes a huge difference being able to play in position post flop for sure. And again, I guess the last thing we'll say on that, Eric, is it also changes the hands that you might open raise with, because since you're continuing with such a large range of hands and limping with a lot of them, that might change the line on which ones get limped and which ones get raised. But yeah, it should be very, very, it should be almost all the hands you're playing in one capacity or another.
So are we talking about the flop or are we talking about the turn here?
Whatever,
What are
I
we-
think
what are we-
The turn.
We're talking
Taylor
pre-flop.
Taylor says the turn is interesting. Yeah, we're gonna find a few rabbit holes. Taylor's interested in the turn, but I'm open to a flop conversation if there's something there that caught your
Well, we
eye.
can, what I wanted to say probably pertains to both, because if we're heads up, we've probably been playing with this person for a while.
Mm, mhm.
So we sort of know what type of a player they are to some extent, or we should. And this should sort of give us an idea of if we can get more chips in on the turn.
Mhm,
And even if we can get more chips in on the flop.
mhm.
So are they sticky? Are they just stabbing as a bluff with their raise? Are they
Mm.
gonna fold a flush draw? Are they gonna fold 6, 5, 6 of offsuit? Are they
Mhm.
what are they? If we have an idea of what kind of opponent we're up against, it sort of gives us more of an idea of where to get the money in. But I would certainly be trying to put more money in at least by the turn, if not on the flop. Yeah.
So do
That's
you-
my take too. Yeah, Rob, go
Do
ahead.
you raise all in then, or could we do
Um,
something kind of tricky, like just do a min click back?
Well, if they've only put in 4, 6, they still have 23 big blinds, so probably I'm only gonna raise to maybe 14 or 15
Mhm.
big blinds and let them put their stack in if they want, or
Mhm.
feel,
Right.
but I'm never gonna fold to an all-in either on a
Right,
bad.
but are you
turn.
are you gonna raise all in there at that point?
I think I would prefer to raise all in than just say 14 blinds, because you're kind of giving them an opportunity to maybe fold a king that we want to
They
keep in
never fold
there.
a king. I don't think
Kim's
they're
like, no, they're
folding
never
a king.
folding.
They're never folding a king.
They're never folding a king there.
Or even a 7 maybe, or some kind of a draw, because we do have a double, two
Like, do
two
you really
flush
think-
draws on the board.
Do you really think they're raising us with a 7?
Yeah, that's the question that I have,
Mm.
is what is their check raising range on the flop? And assuming it's a balanced range, then it's going to have some very strong made hands and some good draws, right? And maybe some air balls, but we don't know enough about this player. I think our hand is, we've basically got one pair, no kicker on the flop, which to me is in that middle part of our value range. And I don't like to, as a rule in a vacuum, I don't like to re-raise with that, because it kind of lets them fold the worst hands and only continue with the better ones.
That's
But
good.
heads
It's
up,
also, we also don't have to worry about having put too much money in if we have to get away from this on a scary
yes,
turn,
yeah,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, there's lots of turns we don't want to see. That's true.
So I don't mind. I like the flop play. I may even like the turn play. That's why I said, what kind of player is this?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And Taylor does go into this kind of, this is the decision point on the turn, which is if we just call, are they going to continue their aggressive line on the river? It is trickier for us because we don't know if they're the kind of player that's going to bluff their missed draws or if they're only going to put it in when the draw comes in. That inclines me to get money in on the turn because the busted draws, they're just not going to call you on the river. There's an argument that they might bluff into you. But it's going to be hard to tell if they're bluffing into you with a busted draw or if they just had a set of 4s the whole time, or a set of 7s or something. And I don't know. I feel like it's hard to get value from some of those draws unless we raise the turn here. I'm not sure if I prefer the shove or the smaller raise, to be honest with you. I think if we had a less strong, if we had, for instance, like the 5-6 of hearts, I kind of like the shove better because you maximize your fold equity and you've got a lot of outs when you are called. With King 9, I think we're still actually ahead of almost all of the hands in their range. So I kind of like your tricky raise call theory here. If they make it 4 and we make it like 11 or 12 or something like that,
Well,
maybe.
they bet it 6. You
Oh,
mean
they
on
bet
the
6.
turn?
Yeah,
Yeah, they bet
sorry. So
6.
yeah. So it would have to be like 13 or
Yeah,
13
I
or
was
14,
thinking
like you say.
13, 14, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, and
interesting. That's interesting.
he didn't say how big the stack is, but from my math, I got like there's 23
Yeah.
big blinds. Is that right?
Yeah, should be like 23
Yeah.
back.
That's
It's
what's left.
kind of a
Yep.
big
So-
shove.
So if we call
It is a little
big
big.
blinds, there's going to be a pot size bet on the river, pretty much.
Yep.
right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So if we call, we're adding 12 to 12. Yes, there would be about a pot size bet on the river, which is, there's something nice and symmetrical about that. Yeah, so what are you
he
thinking?
asked-
Are we committed to getting our money in
Yeah, that's where I
regardless of what
was,
happens?
that's what I was
Hmm.
just kind of thinking myself,
Because
Rob.
regardless of what happens on the river, are we committed to getting our money in? If we
my
are, then
opinion, yes.
I think we are. I definitely think we are.
Yeah.
I would be more inclined to call on the turn and hope that he bets into us. And then if he does at that moment in time, you just push them all in.
And just cross your fingers if it's a heart and, and
Oh,
hope-
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, yep. I mean, there definitely
Yeah.
could be trouble, but I mean, are you committed to this? I mean, I'm pretty sure we're committed to this pot and we're going to be going all in regardless of what happens on the turn or on the river. I'm sorry.
On the river.
But I mean,
So
it
if-
looks like he's setting up the river shove
Mhm.
here with
Mm.
this bet sizing. So
Mhm.
why not make the draws pay now
Mhm.
rather than being able to get away from it?
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Are they going to get away from it? If you jam now, are you going to scare away your prey?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
That's a key question though, because what you really want is if you shove here, you want to get called by those other hands in their range that are not a set of 4s or a set of 7s, because you are destroying that other part of their range. You are doing extremely well against those other hands in this range. Even if he's got like the 5-6 of hearts, he's got a lot of outs, but you're still doing really well.
But is he check
And
raising
he's
that on the
also-
flop?
Right.
Sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
would.
heads up, you got to kind of know your opponent. Some guys
Mhm.
won't, you know.
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah, 'cause to
most
me, it
people will
seems
check
like-
raise 6 high.
Right.
Because it seems to
Yeah,
me like
Ben?
we've seen two aggressive acts by this opponent. They've raised us on the flop, and then they're still putting more money in on
Mhm.
the turn. Are they really gonna fold if we jam? They've already raised us to 4 big blinds. Now they're putting in 6. I guess if we jam, they can fold, but if they make it, if we make it 14 or 16, they still might fold. But
Mhm.
like Kim said, they're not going to fold a king, so we're losing value there. We could win the whole thing. We could win the whole tournament right here, right now, if we just go all in
Yep.
and we see another, a king, queen, or something like that.
And we can
King
also
10.
check and wait for them to bluff the river and
Yeah,
Ye-
so I guess it's
That's the other factor there for sure. I guess the one thing we haven't mentioned is that if we shove here and they fold, that's still a pretty good outcome for us because we win a pretty big pot. We definitely we remove a little more than a third of their chips. We don't have 100% equity in this hand right now, even with top two pair. So if we can win 100% of the pot, that's not a bad outcome. But of course, we want to win the tournament in this hand. So this is what Taylor's writing about specifically, isn't it? It's specifically how can we get all the chips in on this hand? And it really sounds like I hate to say it, but it sounds very villain dependent, doesn't it, gang? If we think that they are the kind of player that's going to bluff draws, busted draws, then that would lean us towards calling and just holding tight and calling every river bet, right? If we think that they're the kind of player who's not going to bluff draws, but is going to call, is going to get sticky with draws on the turn and some second best hands, that's an argument for putting it back on them on the turn, I think. Louis Hillman comes in here and says, with SPR on the river being 0.7, I'm just calling turn as villain's going to be likely to be shoving for value with all the kings and lesser one pair hands. And Louis says they'll also have to bluff misdraws as played. And I'm not sure I'm that confident as Louis is, but it's true that aggressive players are more likely to bluff busted draws than other players. And I think the kind of player that check raises the flop with a spade draw, with a heart draw, is, going to be the kind of player who would bluff a misdraw on the river. So there's an argument for that for sure. Louis says he's never folding to a river shove heads up, even if the front or backdoor flush gets there. And his question is, if we do check, if we do call and the villain checks the river, what's our bet sizing going to be at that point when you've got a pot size bet? And I think if they check the river, then they don't have a lot of hands left in their range that are going to call a pot size bet on the river. So I don't think we're going to get a lot of chips in that way. They might check back. They might check like a weak king or something like that and call.
They might have a strong king.
Yeah,
They might
that's true.
have king, queen, king, jack.
Yep, that's a good point. And good call.
So I think we can get called by a king with a 70% pot shove.
Yep.
And I think we can get called by other two pair that are there.
Yep.
I don't know
7-4.
if seven probably will fold. And all of their missed hands will fold. Some people who are even, when it's their tournament life, they'll just chicken out on that final bluff.
True. True.
Yeah, and then when they just shove river on like a heart or a spade, and you're just there like, oh God, I should have got it in on the turn.
Yeah, I should have got it in on the turn.
That's what I'm thinking. This whole time we're talking about this, like, oh, like now this bad river card's gonna come off, and I'm not gonna know what to do on the river when they shove. And then if they check and we shove, then they just snap
Right.
fold.
Right.
And
that
then we
sucks.
could have won the tournament, and then it's like,
I do feel like we miss the chance sometimes by waiting to the river. We miss the chance for some value from a lot of their hands that would have put chips in on the turn. So especially when we think they have a lot of draws in their hand. In the games I'm playing in, I'm just more inclined to put more chips in on the turn and let them kind of gamble on that draw coming in. Because then we kind of get to realize that equity either way. We don't get them to choose. We don't allow them to choose to get it in when the draw comes in and not when it doesn't. So I really like this. There's a response here by Chris Jones, the one and only 5x5, which kind of gets at some of the ways that we can think about this a little, because we're all talking about how villain dependent it is. And we're kind of like in jail here because we're not sure exactly which kind of villain this is. Chris says, part of the question for me is, what will hearts do here? Are they more likely to call off a turn shove or bluff rivers when they miss? Which is what we're talking about. Chris says, maybe part of our decision making is which king nine offsuit we have. If we have a heart of any kind, they're less likely to have the pair plus flush draw, which would likely be obligated to call a shove. So maybe if we hold a heart, which also blocks their path towards a flush if they hold hearts, we call and try to catch bluffs and then target king X on our river bet. But if we don't hold the heart, maybe we go for the shove and hope to get called by hands that just can't find the fold, both king X hands and hearts. So that's a really interesting way to kind of take some objective information and allow that to inform our decision-making process when we're kind of tied up on how to proceed there. Kim?
I really like that. I really like that, like starting to look at what blockers we hold or don't hold,
Mhm.
right?
Mm-hmm. And the board was king of spades and nine of spades. So we could have the king of hearts or we could have the nine of hearts. If we have a king of hearts, that's obviously a much better blocker towards their heart holdings. Although in a heads up pot like this, blind versus blind, they're going to be continuing with all sorts of different ranked hands when it comes to flush draws. So I don't think having the king is as relevant as it would be in other situations where they're just not calling with a lot of those other suited hands. So
I'm in
yeah, Rob.
favor of a click back on the turn to like 13, 14
Mhm.
big blinds. I just think we talk about this a lot, and I always say this, they still have hope. You know, they still have hope on the
Yes,
turn.
yes.
And as long as they
yes.
still have hope, we can get more chips from them.
Yep.
And not be afraid of calling if they jam. You know,
Mhm.
as a matter of fact, we could be inducing that jam, which is what we'd like to be doing right now. So I don't want to jam here. I think that's just too big, too strong. You're going to just fold out so much of his the hands that you're ahead of that it just doesn't pay off. If you can get him to commit more chips by just getting a little min click back, like I say, 20 or 12 to 13 big blinds, something like that, and get him excited about it, he still has hope, and see if he can try to jam us off our hand. And obviously he can't. So
I just
Yeah,
gotta
I
live up.
like-
I just gotta live up to my screen name. Be jamming.
Yeah, be jamming. That's right. One of the things I really like about that, Rob, is that it just gives him it puts him in a series of bad spots. Like it's a very small raise, so they have to continue with a pretty wide range to it. But it also leaves them with a pretty trivial stack given the pot size on the river, which it gives them like another uncomfortable decision. So anytime you can choose a small sizing that still kind of gives your opponent a bunch of difficult decisions, and that's often a good path to take there. Okay, here's my question, gang. Can we click it back here with a balanced range, or are we only actually doing this when we have like two pair plus and we're trying to achieve this same goal? And I'm not saying we need to be balanced in every spot. Maybe we don't. Maybe this isn't one of those where we do anyway. But just academically, are there hands that are not very strong value that we would consider clicking back here
Sure. I can
that
think
we
of a
called
few
the flop
on the
check
fly.
raise with?
Maybe a
flop
bad
check raise.
a flush draw with no showdown value, a bad flush draw.
We could have something like, but then we're probably shoving. Then we're probably shoving to maximize that fold equity, right? When we
That's
don't
true,
have,
yeah.
but we're
Mhm.
saying, would we then use that as a way to balance this? So I don't mean to discount that. Like they could have, for instance, like the 6-8 of spades now has a lot going for it on the king 7-9-4 two-tone.
are
But
you
again,
calling a raise on the flop with
on the
6-8 of
flop, that's
spades?
no, probably not.
Or
Yeah.
check raise. Yeah.
Or yeah, of heart.
Yeah, I
guess
check
meant
raising.
hearts,
Yeah, I was like 10-6 of spades, maybe.
Yeah.
Like check raises, but that's even like, I don't know. It'd be pretty
Yeah.
ambitious.
we're talking about what would we have that we could call a check raise, right? Because we
Right.
bet
Yes. Good point.
we called a check raise on the flop. So what hands could we have that we called a check raise with that are not value like the king nine that we have? What
And that
other
looks
other
like a lot of
hands might we
kings,
do?
right? Like
Yeah.
what else are we what else are we bet calling the flop with?
We could be doing it with a couple of hearts.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, if we had the ace of hearts, ace of hearts,
Yep.
five of hearts, or something like that.
Yep. Yeah, ace five of hearts even has a couple backdoor straight draws in there. So that makes sense. And it's got ace high showdown value. So that's a good one. Okay. So maybe we could. So I guess I like the click back turn. That's where I'm coming to with this. Given
With no
all the
intention of
information.
folding. Click back.
With no, yeah, never folding. Good game if they have pocket fours, like sometimes you just lose. Like sometimes you just make good decisions and they're at the top of their range. And especially on wet boards like this, they have license to make these moves with those semi bluffs and with their very strong hands. And you just don't get to know. You just don't get to know, barring some kind of physical tell or a timing tell or something like that.
One of the
It's
things,
just,
if
Yeah.
we do that and he thinks that we're doing it with some sort of a flush draw
mhm.
or something like that, he's more likely than to jam back on us with a king,
Yep.
with a worse king than ours. And that is a perfect result, right? That's a perfect
Yeah.
result.
And not only that, but the kind of player that we're hoping is going to bluff shove a misdraw on the river, aren't they also going to shove on the turn if we give them this opportunity?
Exactly. Yep.
So I think we can still get value from that player by clicking it back on the turn, because the same inclination that would make them bluff the river, which we'd hoping they would do, I think they would still, they're the kind of player that would shove that equity now with the draw. And that's kind of our mission here is to get chips in with the part of their range that we're beating. And that's a lot of the draws here as well. So I do like that. Eric, you had a really good response here. So Eric got into our bonus discussion where, and I don't know, should we just tie a bow on this before we get into Eric's position? So I think we've kind of decided that against certain players, just calling and planning to call all rivers is the right play. Although I still think if they check, you're not going to get the bottom chip in calling turn. I just don't think that's very likely. And then against other players, we like the raising the turn or even shoving. And Kim mentioned maybe even re-raising the flop against certain players with a hand as strong as top pair in a heads up pot like this. So what do you think? Is there anything else we should talk about that, Ben or Rob or Eric, before we get into Eric's?
I have one little
discussion?
rabbit hole to go down. On Chris's post, he mentioned if they check back the river, target king, top pair.
Yeah.
Is that a good place to target? Should we try to get second pair to call or ace high even?
That's a good question.
What size bet would be a good bet if they check on the river?
I think 70% pot bet, because it's also gonna be all our bluffs that missed.
Yeah.
So just shove it no matter what.
Yeah, I think if I think like second
We have
pair-
6 high.
Right.
If we have 6 high here on the river, we have to shove,
Right.
right? And we're gonna make most hands except maybe a king fold.
And that's the way we should be thinking about this, right? Because we want to
With
get
range.
called. We want to get called by our value hands. So let's put ourselves in our bluffing shoes and say, well, they're never folding a king if we shove with 6 high here. So that means that we can target king high with our value hands because they're never folding a king. Are they maybe folding a 9, or maybe they're calling a 9, like that second pair? Then that becomes kind of like your target here. And I don't know if betting a third pot versus shoving 2/3 pot makes enough of a difference against that part of the range. So I think that's a good thing to be thinking about, Eric. I like the probably the full bet here. Also, I think other players, especially in the games we're playing in, they don't care that much about saving 5 big blinds to then go heads up against the person who's got 55 big blinds. They're not going to be that elastic to the sizing.
Yeah, they're
gonna
shoving the next hand anyway.
Exactly. So they may as well put those extra 5 chips in here where they have so much equity already in this pot. So I think I'd go for the shove on the river. So the bonus
Yeah, that was
discussion
just a question. I didn't know. I'm with trying to get it all in on the turn, but
No, it's a good question because I think a lot of people get lazy about what are we targeting. We talk about targeting a lot on the show here because I think it's a really important part of value betting and bluffing is having a hand in mind that you expect your opponent to fold or call depending on the sizing. That's how you choose your sizing, right? So I think it's a really good thing to be thinking about every time you're considering putting chips in the middle. So the bonus discussion is if this were instead at the final table 3 or 4 handed as opposed to heads up, there'd be a big ICM implication. And do we approach this spot differently? Now, in that case, it would really, again, depend who covered who, I think. If we were the bigger stack, I'm definitely shoving turn, might even be shoving flop, but definitely shoving turn. And I would be with a ton of range there, with a ton of my range as well, as played this way.
Agreed.
If I was, yeah.
Mm.
Kim's never afraid to get those chips in with the chip lead. That's a good way to print some dough, print some money. What if they covered us? Would that change how we played? It might make us less inclined to call any river. Maybe now we're going to get into like check and hope mode, but that's probably not how we got to the final table. Like, I'm not sure we want to change our whole game that drastically here.
I think we're shoving turn, once we get to 3 or 4 players, so it's hard to say, like, because we're not really, unless we do call, it's like we're probably getting it in anyways, somewheres on the turn, especially if they have us covered, because then we're going to be shorter.
Right.
So
Yeah, let's say we're one of the middle stacks, 4-handed, and the small stack is not in this hand, but we're up against the big stack. So we don't want to bust on this hand because there's a short stack out there.
it's a big mistake to go out before the bottom stack.
Right. Yes.
So
So
you
then
kind
are
of
we-
play passive and
When we're talking ICM post flop, we have a thing called downward drift. Okay, and that's
I love this.
when we're post flop, downward drift is when big bets become small bets. Small bets become checks, raises become calls, and calls become folds. So as long as we're taking the aggressive action, we're better off because we still like the bluff draws, gut shots, runners. We can get lots of folds on the turns and rivers. So when we're looking at value and trying to build a pot without overcommitting, who covers who is very, very important. So we just have to keep in mind the downward drift. We're not going to make those big bets anymore.
Mhm.
We're going to make smaller bets. We're not going to be raising anymore. We're going to be calling as opposed to raising. So a lot of those dynamics come into play when you're down, when you have an extreme ICM situation.
Yep. I love that. You can tell Rob is the book study master because he's been reading along with Darrow Kearney's ICM book with Barry Carter, working on all this stuff furiously behind the scenes. And Kim's the one who has all her ranges perfectly worked out, like the technician she is, because she knows exactly what stack size to start shoving with and that sort of thing. So it's great. It's great to gain this kind of insight. And Ben, you've been playing for a while now. You're a popular Twitch streamer. You're building out this whole reputation in the world of poker, taking the step to come join the Wrecking Crew here. We're excited to have you on. Before we wrap up the show here a little bit, why don't you just talk a little bit about where you like to stream, what kind of games you like to play, what got you excited about it? And I know we'll be having you on the chats edition of the podcast for your own interview with Troy soon, but just a couple words to kind of let Rec Poker audience know a little more about you.
Put me right on the spot, why don't you?
Lead us.
Well, it all started back when I won the Blowout Series package. That was way back. I think it was 2019 or just around the start of 2020, where
Is that
PokerStars had a
you
bunch
put out a
of
forum post about
yeah,
that,
yeah, it
didn't
was
you?
actually a forum post, yeah, that I
I
started. And
remember that.
I said I want to stream it because big tournament, $1,000 buy-in. I wanted to have some friends in there and stuff, and I'd already knew about Rec Poker before, so it was just kind of like the perfect situation where I could get your guys' take on it, and I got to come on the podcast and stuff like that. So and then since then it's just been me just basically playing, rec poker, basically like recreational, just on the weekends. Got a little bit more serious about it lately and stuff like that with the stream and stuff. We're putting in a little bit more effort than what we were before. So definitely appreciate any support. And I think becoming part of the Wrecking Crew is just a perfect blend for everything, and just going in that direction. So yeah, definitely feeling welcomed and stuff. And yeah, it's been really good so far. I got to figure out some more of the technical stuff yet. And
It's a journey. Don't get
it's
me
a
started
journey,
on the
yeah.
technical stuff. But yeah, you're fitting
I
in
re-
great, man.
I
Yeah.
remember back in 2020 sometime, we were doing an OPA and I was hosting the OPA that night. And it's the first time I came across Ben and actually talked to him. And he made a pretty deep run in our home game that night. And I was very impressed with his thought patterns because basically it was just him and I at the end, and it was just him. So nobody else was in the chat with us, so we could talk pretty frankly about what was going on. And as he talked his way through the hands, it was like, okay, this guy could be a Twitch guy because this is what he's doing. He's doing a very good job of it right here. And that was 2 years ago. So I'm really glad to see where you've gone so far, Ben. It's really, really fun to see that.
Well, and I'm excited for what the future holds and stuff. I mean, a big goal of mine is to play a live tournament. I've never played a live MTT before, and I want to pick the right spot because I hear I listen to Andrew and Carlos a lot, and they're just like, Carlos is just like shitting on live poker, right? And I'm just
Yeah, he's
grinding.
not a fan.
Meanwhile, I'm grinding online trying to build a roll so I can, go to Vegas, right?
Yeah.
and he's like, nah, he's like, play online, just do that. But it is one of my goals just because I've never had that experience before. So I'm
Yeah,
looking forward to
people wouldn't
building
believe
that.
it though when they hear you talk about poker. Like you really know your stuff, and you've mentioned a couple times you're still waiting for that to play in that one major tournament, that live MTT. And it's just like, how does this guy knows so much about poker? I can't believe it.
Yeah.
Your ceiling is really high, man.
Never mind Vegas, Ben. We're gonna do a road trip to Playground Poker.
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go.
That's right. If we don't do one out to Halifax, get even closer to home for you. So, but yeah,
Well,
let's
I might start working on that Halifax angle a little bit because their poker room is really good and the atmosphere is awesome and stuff like that. And it's a really great room, and I see potential there possibly. So I'm gonna see what I can do. The problem is I don't really play a lot, and I'm not really rolled to play, in a live game.
Right.
Even 1-3 is pretty, big for me, right? So to get to play there, I only play every once in a while, if I feel like going and taking a shot and splashing around a little bit. So we'll work
I think
on it. We'll see what we can do.
you had a pretty good result this weekend. If Twitter's any indication, it looked like
Yeah. That was
had a couple
WPT has been treating us really well. They've been running their satellites for the 10K. So that's where I've been grinding that really hard, trying to get a seat in that. So we got 1 week left. I'm gonna try and get in
Nice.
there. So
Well,
yeah.
fingers crossed, man. We're all looking forward to seeing what the future holds. Okay, so Eric Anderson, just to wrap it up, the conversation here. So the bonus discussion from Taylor was if this was 3 or 4 handed and there's ICM implications, do we approach the spot differently? And I think Eric, you make a great point here about in an ICM spot, we're more likely to be just kind of checking and calling, giving them the opportunity to make the mistake and trying to get that king 9 to showdown. And you talk about sort of like the stack to pot ratio as well. And then I really like the way you break down the equity that our opponent might have with different holdings. Eric, what tool do you use when because Eric, if people don't know, Eric posts all sorts of great stuff in the forums and on Discord. It's very detailed. He's obviously using poker resources to get some of this information together. He's got a great grasp of the mathematics of poker. Eric, what tools do you use when you're putting a post response like this together to help you calculate the different equity for the different hands they can have and that kind of thing?
I usually don't use a calculator or anything. There's charts you can find online. It says if you have 8 outs on the flop, it's going to be 33%
Yep.
chance of hitting it. That's usually, I just look at one of those charts, figure out how many outs I have and what kind of equity I need, and then compare that to the pot odds.
Nice. Well, thanks for all your
Doesn't-
contributions, man.
That doesn't take into consideration the equity that you might already have. You might already be ahead. And so it should be your hand versus your opponent's range should be where you should be looking to see what that equity is. What you're figuring out is what the pot odds. So what you need pot odds wise to continue, and then your outs, that's assuming you're behind. If
Yeah.
you're already ahead, you've got more equity than you think you have.
Yeah, and you always have some equity. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, cool. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. Maybe that bum Taylor could learn us something if he listens up and
Yeah,
learns how to fill out.
Give
his
us some more
form close.
details. Yeah, give us
Yeah.
some more details next time, Taylor. Come on.
Taylor, if you're listening, we
Didn't
love
even
you.
put in what suits he had. Like,
Yeah, we didn't
like,
know. Did he
no
have the 9 of
stack
hearts or the king of
sizes,
hearts?
like,
Like, what the
oh,
hell,
man.
man? Come
And
on.
reads on his opponent. What is
Yeah.
what is his opponent been doing?
timing tells. Come
All right. Well, this has been a real treat. Thank you to Taylor Moss for posting it here. Thanks to Kim and Ben and Eric and Rob for going through the hand with me here. Thanks to Mark Brashan at Website Amp and the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. And you, the listeners, we couldn't do it without you. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.